Witam serdecznie.
Dear colleagues, please welcome to the joint meeting of Libe and FAM committees, which is held on the second anniversary of a decision by the so-called Constitutional Court in Poland on the de facto ban of abortion in Poland. This hearing is organized jointly by two joint committees, FAM and LIBE committee. Therefore, I would like to welcome Vice Chair Pietro Bartolo, who will co-chair this hearing with me. I would also like to welcome all the guest speakers. First of all, a few words on my part. As you know, in Poland, for 2 years now, we have had the law which, in our evaluation and also according to the evaluation of Parliament, this law it is tantamount to the violation of human rights. This is what our two resolutions say, because we adopted two resolutions with a view to a decision by the Polish Tribunal Court. This legislation violates fundamental human rights, treaties, and based on the recommendations in the resolution, the Council should start a procedure under Article 7 of the EU Treaty. And this is also the position of our committee, but also European Parliament's position. In the resolution, we also call upon the committee, which I chair, to organize a fact-finding mission in Poland in order to evaluate the situation of girls and women with a view to analyze the situation when it comes to access to abortion services. This mission took place about 2 weeks ago, and today, during our meeting, we will accept the report from this mission. Fred Matic, who is present today, was head of the mission. Dear colleagues, we have to say clearly, and you will find the same thing in the report from the mission, that this legislation, barbaric legislation, I am not afraid to say this, this barbaric law has also caused victims. We have at least 6 documented cases of women who simply died because of this barbaric law. These 6 women are women whom we know their names, but a lot of girls, a lot of women are unknown, and our duty as both committees is not only to talk about it, our duty is to fight for their rights. Today I would like to show you something. This is something that best illustrates this situation, this hellish situation of women in Poland. This is the latest report of the International Parenthood Federation. So this is the most prestigious organization which deals with sexual and reproductive rights globally. When this report was presented, those who presented the report said that on this map they ran out of colors. They ran out of this deep purple color because Poland is beyond any yardsticks. The situation in Poland is that bad that so far there have never been a country which would lower the standards when it comes to reproductive health rights that much. And this is our situation in Poland. And I would like to tell you, and I am also, I base it also on the report from the mission. This report talks not only about Polish women whose rights are violated. This report describes also the situation of Ukrainian women and girls who fleeing war. They are also escaping from Russian soldiers who rape girls, who rape women. And these women, if they want to use abortion, they are not able to do that in Poland. So they escape from one hell to find themselves in another. And we as Parliament, as EU, as our FAM committee, we cannot turn our blind eye to that. Therefore, we organize this hearing. We want to hear those women who should talk on this subject. And thank you for having accepted the invitation. Today, we are also hosting a sister-in-law of Miss Izabela from Pszczyna, who was the first known victim of this barbaric law. So Miss Izabela will give her testimony. This will be very emotional, and thank you very much for your presence. And now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Bartolo, Vice Chair of the Libe Committee. Pietro, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert Biedron. Thank you, Chair, for these introductory remarks. You have a very keen sensitivity to these subjects, and it is something that is obvious. Now, the FAM and LIBE committees are following very carefully what is happening in terms of women's sexual and reproductive health and rights in Poland, and with great concern. Now, since 2015, we've really seen a backsliding of democracy, rule of law, and fundamental rights in Poland, and we've been sounding the alarm on that. On the 20th of December 2017, the Commission finally triggered Article 7 that you spoke of, Article 7, Paragraph 1 TEU, in relation to the Polish judicial reforms, considering that essential safeguards ensuring the separation of powers between the executive and the judiciary had effectively been removed. The Parliament expressed its dissatisfaction about how slow the procedure was going in the Council, and immediately issued an interim report on the 17th of September 2020 on this matter. In its interim report, the Parliament clearly stated that the main concerns in Poland are as follows: the functioning of the legislative and electoral system, the independence of the judiciary and the rights of judges, and the protection of fundamental rights. Unfortunately, yet again, we must reiterate that removing democratic checks and balances and undermining fundamental rights go hand in hand. This is not an abstract problem. It has serious consequences on human life. Today's hearing will show that very well. On the 21st of October 2020, the ruling party made a request, and the Polish Constitutional Tribunal thereby declared one of the 3 exceptions allowing legal abortion to be unconstitutional. This limited very severely the right to abortion, to the point of being almost impossible to find that health care. The Parliament's resolution of 26 November 2020 on the de facto ban on the right to abortion in Poland highlighted the link between the political capture of the Polish Constitutional Tribunal and the ruling of 21 October 2020. On 27 January 2021, the highly restrictive abortion law entered into force in Poland. Now, this entails a clear risk to women's lives, a risk with potentially deadly consequences, as we've said, and in some cases. We have actual cases where this happened. Having said all of that, I should, however, like to warmly welcome our speakers who are here with us today to bear witness to this heartfelt drama. Allow me to pay tribute to the family who is bringing their story to us today, and to all of the families who lost their relatives due to this de facto abortion ban in Poland. I would like, on this note, to give the floor back to Robert so that he can present our speakers.
Grazie tante, Pietro.
Thank you, Pietro.
Very much. And now we start with the presentations. And as a first, I will give the floor for the sister-in-law of Izabela from Pszczyna, Barbara Skrobol, who will present her testimony from her sister-in-law. I must tell you that Izabela was the first documented victim of this barbaric legislation. Her face is on the poster which we prepared for the hearing. Izabela was a young woman. She was a dreamer. She was 30 years old, as I remember, when she died. And she's the first documented victim of this barbaric legislation. So, Barbara, the floor is yours.
Dzień dobry Państwu.
Good afternoon. My name is Barbara Skrobol and I'm a sister-in-law of the late Izabela from Pszczyna. I'm speaking here today on behalf of the family because those closest to Izabela are still grieving, are still in pain, and to this day they are not able to speak in public about what has happened. Izabela was a 30-year-old woman, a loving wife and mother. For her 9-year-old daughter Maya, she was not only a friend but also a guide. Izabela loved traveling, wanted to show other cultures to her child. Izabela loved life, she enjoyed living. She liked accomplishing her objectives. As a businesswoman, she had a very well-run hair salon. She had been trying to get pregnant again for 3 years. When she was 22 weeks pregnant, she got hospitalized, and it turned out there was no amniotic fluid in the womb. Edwards syndrome and the high likelihood of fatal fetal abnormalities have been diagnosed. However, she was informed that because of the restrictive anti-abortion law, the doctors were not allowed to terminate pregnancy then and then. Let me quote her text messages. "We need to wait for the heartbeat to stop. This is because of the PIS. Potentially, if my life is in danger, perhaps they will do something. This is awful, those procedures." Let me quote some other text messages. Question: are they going to induce labor? No, they can't. They need to wait for it to start spontaneously, or for the heartbeat to stop, or for the waters to break. It needs to happen spontaneously. Those procedures are tantamount to tormenting mothers. This is Kaczynski's and Duda's doing. They treat women as if they were incubators. Here I am reading out those messages. It's a testimony of a dying person. I'm saying it with a heavy heart. Iza knew that she could die of sepsis. She knew she was being tortured, forced to wait for the fetus to die. She also wrote in her messages that the child was being tormented as well, the baby, the fetus. The family wasn't allowed to visit Izabela because of the COVID restrictions. Iza stayed in touch with her family until 11 p.m. Shortly after midnight, Iza died of a septic shock. In this hospital, she should have been safe, but help was refused. She should have been helped in accordance with the current medical standards. This has not been done. When Iza was hospitalized, she asked the doctors, the nurses, for help. She was saying, "I want to live. I want to live for my family." She wanted to live for her husband and her daughter Maya. Maya, her daughter, will never be able to hug her mom again. Iza was also worried about her mom and brother, for whom she was a great source of support. Maya, the daughter, wrote a goodbye letter to her mom saying, "I love you, mommy. I can't believe you are dead. I will always remember you. I will always love you. I will never forget you." Maya wanted her father to put this letter as the last goodbye into the coffin. Now Maya goes to the grave, comes to the grave of her mom almost every day, brings teddy bears, her school's artwork. She wants to be close. Medical errors have been made, no doubt about it, but here I am telling you about a story which shows how law can affect the life of one individual. The restrictive law has caused a chilling effect. That's why Izabela died. I was personally told by a doctor that they weren't able to do anything because of the anti-abortion law. Izabela died. People took to the streets in order to express their solidarity, in order to protest against what had happened. We were touched, but it also gave us strength to fight for Iza and to fight for other women who still have their lives to live. I am here today because a state should support women. This new anti-abortion law hurts women, takes away their human rights, their freedom of choice, their freedom to decide about their bodies and their lives. Iza has paid a highest price for this. She paid with her life. Her life was basically taken away from her. I would like to make a plea to call on to you as decision makers. Let us make sure that this never happens again, that nothing like this ever happens again to any women. Let us not take away wives from their husbands and mothers from their children. Not a single one more. Thank you very much.
Wysłuchamy Kamili.
Thank you very much. And now we will hear the voice of Kamila Ferenc, a lawyer from the Foundation for Women and Family Planning, FEDERA. This is the foundation that we met while in Poland, and our committee cooperates with this foundation, and this organization helps women when it comes to access to sexual and reproductive rights. Madam Ferenc, the floor is yours.
For having me. First of all, I want to thank you, Barbara, for this amazing speech that was the best way, with those photos, with your memories, to help us realize that we actually lost one of us, our sister. Thank you a lot. Dear all, you've heard about Izabela's case. I want you to see that we have more such similar cases. I want to show you some examples. Next slide, please. A few examples of women who lost their lives in Poland only because they were women at reproductive age and they got pregnant in Poland. This is the case of Justyna, who was 34 years old when she died as a mother of 2 boys in December 2020 in the hospital in Wodzisław Śląski in southern Poland. She gave birth to stillborn by cesarean section. She had sepsis infection because of the medical negligence. Criminal proceedings were discontinued, but still there is a pending claim for compensation in her case. Next slide, please. We know the case of Ania from Świdnica, 32 years old, who died in June 2021 in Świdnica Hospital. She also gave birth to stillborn by cesarean section. She also had sepsis infection, and the criminal proceedings in her case are still being conducted by Wrocław Prosecution Office. Next slide, please. And Marta, who died in April 2022 in Katowice Hospital. She also gave birth to stillborn. She also has sepsis infection, and criminal proceedings in her case are still pending. Also, Ombudsperson for Patients' Rights is verifying the circumstances of this case. Next slide, please. And now is the time to pose a question. What do these cases have in common? Next slide, please. They are not only unfortunate cases and exceptions in Poland. No, they are victims of the restrictive anti-abortion law and practice in Poland. They are victims of the pattern of treating a woman in Poland as an object, least important, that has nothing to say, and she's not being asked what she wants and what she needs. Those women, they are only examples, and we know more cases, and there are probably cases that we don't know about. They all are victims of chilling effect on doctors who right now in Poland are afraid of undertaking activities that could be qualified as abortion. Those doctors wait too long to induce birth of a stillborn. They procrastinate to remove dead fetus on time. They hesitate to remove ectopic or other threatening pregnancy. And this way, they threaten women's life and health. Next slide, please. This all leads to the reduction of the standards of gynecological healthcare in Poland. And this negatively affect other reproductive health services, such as access to perinatal standards, prenatal testing, or contraceptives. As a result, we know the statistics that more and more women don't want to have children, don't want to get pregnant and start families, but more children are born with severe and fatal defects that lead to their death shortly after birth. And if those newborns survive, the families are barely provided with any assistance in Poland. Next slide, please. Today in Poland, contact with the public healthcare system is just traumatizing for all women. The trust between patients and medicals is lost. As a consequence, women's health, physical and mental as well, women's life and safety is at risk on a bigger and bigger scale every day, which is not only horrifying in the middle of Europe, but is also the disaster of the modern Europe. The best illustration of the situation is our work. During 2 years, the FEDERA, my organization, answered around 20,000 phone calls and 12,000 mails. We provided 1,200 legal consultations concerning access to abortion in Poland. We recognized the systemic violation of women's rights on a massive scale, so we brought 30 cases to the European Court of Human Rights. We also faced the problem of the criminalization of abortion in Poland for doctors and helpers, which ended up in the Justyna's case. Justyna is an activist who helped a domestic violence survivor to have an abortion because she wanted that. This woman wanted to have an abortion, and now Justyna is being prosecuted in Poland for just helping and being empathetic in the situation. But the most important question for today is, what do we need to be done? Next slide, please. And we need strong reaction and position of the European Union on abortion, because abortion is not a political or religious statement. Access to abortion is actually the human right and the universal experience of millions of women all over the world. Access to abortion allows to decide on your future, on the future of your family, on your body, on your health. And this decision about abortion should be in our hands, in the hands of women, not in the hands of conservative politicians, doctors, prosecutors, or judges. Abortion is linked to the respect for human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, the rule of law, and respect for human rights, which are values of the European Union, and those values must be followed by Poland. The EU competence in the field of public health is shared with member states, especially in case of the threat to public health. The EU should take action to make sure that the standards of care is uniformized on the level of European Union, and access to safe, legal, often life-saving abortion should be considered as a shared EU standard. Abortion must be included in the European Union's policies on health, safety and equality. Next slide, please. Polish women should be treated the same as other EU citizens in regards to access to essential reproductive health services. The EU needs to ensure that Polish women have access to safe, legal and free of charge abortion on the territory of the European Union. What is more, organizations which advocate to access to abortion and provide help to women need to be financially supported. How to do it? This is the question to you, honourable members of the Parliament. But one thing should be clear. This is your duty not to leave Polish women behind, because this is the reality and the situation in Poland one day may be the reality of your own country. Thank you very much.
I wanted to thank Barbara for this story that she shared with us. It was incredibly moving and extremely sad. And of course, I would also like to thank you for these comments as well, Kamila. They were extremely important. I'd like to give the floor now to Neil Detta, Secretary of the European Parliamentary Forum for Sexual and Reproductive Rights. Welcome back to Parliament. We are looking forward to your presentation. Could you tell us also about the case that has been brought against you following that we had on the 24th of February 2021, a Libe Fem meeting that we discussed, in which we discussed this subject. I'd like to give you the floor now, and you have 7 minutes to for your speech.
Good afternoon, everyone. Greetings from Thailand, where I'm at International Family Planning Conference. I'm sorry I could not be with you in person, but thank you nonetheless for giving me the floor. And also, I'd like to share my sympathies with the family of Izabela for the trauma that has befallen on your family. I'm very sorry to hear that. Just a few words to begin with about EPF. For those of you who don't know us, so we are a European Parliamentary Forum for Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights. We are a parliamentary network, and we work with parliamentarians, MPs and MEPs from all democratic parties, and we prioritize sexual and reproductive health and rights. So I think this is why we're here today. And as the moderator said, as the chair said, we testified at the previous hearing in February of last year. Next slide, please. Next, okay, thank you. So since the Constitutional Tribunal hearing of October 2020, what we've noticed and what we've heard from partners in Poland, such as Kamila Ferenc from FEDERA, among many others, is that the situation has degraded in 3 specific areas: health, human rights, and democracy and the rule of law. And then plus all of this has been exacerbated by the humanitarian situation as a result of the Russian aggression in Ukraine. Next slide, please. So first, in terms of health, so we've already heard the jarring testimony of the relative of a victim of this barbaric law. But more broadly, what we're seeing is that Polish women in droves are seeking abortion care in other countries. Another thing that we should be pointing out that's happening in Poland is that we have fake guidelines from civil society actors such as Ordo Iuris being cited by medical staff who refuse to perform the life-saving medical procedures that we've just heard are necessary in many cases of women who need abortion care. So that doctors are proactively provided with fake guidelines by non-state actors in order to help them not provide the abortion care that's needed. And as a result, what we've seen is that a number of Polish women have died. But I want to contrast this with what has happened this year at international level. At international level, the World Health Organization has adopted abortion care guidelines, which provides very clear guidance to states about what they should be doing in terms of abortion care. And I'll be coming back to that throughout the rest of the presentation. Next slide. So first, one of the things that these WHO guidelines state is that the right to sexual and reproductive health requires states to ensure healthcare facilities, goods and services are available, accessible, and of good quality. And what we find is that Poland is well outside the norm of human rights regarding health in both abortion care and contraception. Next slide, please. And so these maps will be familiar because Mr. Biedron has shared one of them. But here we have two overviews of abortion policies on the one hand and contraception policies on the other hand across the European region. And what you will find is that Poland, in both cases, for abortion and contraception, stands out in this unique deep red that we had to invent just for Poland on both restrictive abortion care, but also poor access to poor policies in relation to contraception, so that women in Poland not only can they not choose about how a pregnancy should go forward or not, but they don't even have the same access to contraception to decide whether or not to get pregnant. And aside from just taking a look at how Polish women compare with other EU member states, looking at this map, we're forced to conclude that women living in Putin's Russia have greater rights to control their bodies than women living in the EU member state of Poland today. Next slide. Next, I want to touch upon the issue of democracy and rule of law, and this was alluded to by the co-chair of this session. What we have seen is the use of what are called SLAP cases. This is strategic litigation against public participation, or another way, perhaps more commonly stated, is that these are nuisance lawsuits meant to intimidate people. Now, these SLAP cases have several purposes. We can see that they're meant to intimidate the target of the case. They're meant to exhaust them emotionally and financially. They also serve as a public lesson to others, so that, for example, Justina, that Kamila Ferenc mentioned, is being sued in part to serve as a beacon to others to not provide assistance to other women seeking abortion care. But what we see is that some non-state actors use these SLAP cases in order to fundraise their anti-abortion activism. And now this has been typically targeted against human rights activists in Poland working on abortion, women's rights, LGBT, journalists myself, and as the chair mentioned, myself even, and one of my own staff, so that we have both been subject to court cases, to lawsuits by a specific organization called Ordo Juris. The one against my staff, Remy Bach, Ordo Juris has lost it. We are now awaiting payment by Ordo Juris for the court costs, but myself, I'm being sued by Ordo Juris for the testimony that I provided in this setting in February of last year, when I provided testimony about the situation in Poland. Next slide. Yeah, next. Yeah, thank you. So here's just an overview of, go back to one slide. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So here's just an overview of how these court cases, these SLAP cases look like. So as I said, there's one specifically against me for the testimony that I provided in this setting. So as I said, the court case will be in February of next year. But what's happening with me is just small compared to what's happening to other people in Poland. One of the other witnesses at the hearing of February last year was Marta Lempart. She is the head of the women's strike in Poland. The woman who organized those big marches. When I exchanged with her just recently, she told me that she is now facing 106 similar cases brought either by the state or other private actors such as Ordo Juris. And so we can see that this is a systematic attempt to silence opponents. There's a coalition based in Brussels called the Coalition Against Slaps in Europe, which identified specifically the head of the Polish government and this organization Ordo Juris in a parody contest of which entities, which individuals and organizations use this intimidation tactic the most frequently. And we can see that here it's the head of the Polish government and this Polish organization, Ordo Juris, who won the parody contest of European SLAP. Next slide. One word also on the Russian aggression against Ukraine and what this means in Poland. As was mentioned by the chair, there's a challenge of Ukrainian refugee women accessing abortion care in Poland, but we also hear anecdotes that the same thing is happening in Hungary and Slovakia. So Poland does not stand out particularly for this, although the volume of Ukrainian refugees in Poland does make it a very unique issue. what we have also heard about is that a number of anti-abortion organizations, again Ordo Iuris, but also other organizations, are busy making sure that Ukrainian women do not have access to abortion care when they arrive in Poland. And I think it's worthwhile noting that this is contrary to international human rights and humanitarian law regarding abortion in humanitarian settings. Next slide. And I'll end here. I think my 7 minutes are up. Just some parting thoughts. I'd like to cite once more the WHO abortion care guidelines, which clearly state that states should not criminalize having an abortion, or those who have an abortion, or those who support someone having an abortion. This is clear guidelines to member states of the WHO, including Poland. However, in Poland, we see that it uniquely violates women's rights to health and dignity in a number of areas, abortion care, but also access to contraception, basically the whole range of a woman's ability to control her own body. And then also we see that there's active attempts to silence opponents both inside Poland and outside Poland through targeted campaigns of judicial harassment done by the Polish state itself, but by non-state actors such as Ordo Iuris and others who are aligned with the government's ultra-conservative agenda. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Datta, for these remarks and for the answers that you have given us today. I'd like to give the floor now to Ms. Caroline Hickson, who is the Regional Director of the International Planned Parenthood Federation European Network. Ms. Hickson, thank you again for having accepted our invitation to speak today. You also have 7 minutes to speak.
Thank you very much. I received this invitation to speak just around the same day as the 10th anniversary of the death of Savita Halpanava in Ireland, which is my native country. And it makes me so angry that I'm listening to another testimony 10 years later. It makes me so angry, and I'm so sorry for your family. But it did make me think about contrasting the steps that the Irish government took with the steps that the Polish government have taken. The Irish government was certainly no saint when it came to abortion. They hid their heads in the sand for a long time. But after Savita's death, it became clear what Irish citizens wanted. And eventually, the call of the people of Ireland was heeded, and we had a referendum, and we changed the law. Contrast that to the Polish government, when we know even back in 2016, when they first launched their attack on women's reproductive freedom, nearly 3/4 of Polish citizens, the poll showed, did not want further restrictions to abortion. And poll after poll in Poland has shown that Polish citizens are not in line with their government, and their government is deliberately ignoring and riding over the Polish people's wishes. They have continued cynically to push the ban. And as we've heard, when they couldn't get it through the parliamentary process, they turned to the Constitutional Tribunal, whose independence and legitimacy is profoundly eroded and politically compromised. And the only people standing up to them are the brave women and men who come out onto the streets and who protest in hundreds of thousands, and the brave organizations like FEDERA, like the Polish Women's Strike, who stand up, who speak truth to power. But they are suffering for it. And Neil already mentioned in his speech how activists are being attacked through the use of strategic litigation and slaps, but they are also being directly threatened and attacked physically during protests. Footage documented by activists and journalists on social media showed police using tear gas, pepper spray, and physically assaulting protesters. Protesters described being hit in the face, hit with a truncheon, and kicked in the groin by police at the protests after being pinned to the ground. And this comes from a damning 2021 report from Poland's independent torture prevention body. But we, IPPF, working with Human Rights Watch and other civil society organizations, have also documented what is happening to civil society organizations. At least 6 staff from at least 6 organizations received bomb threats, and they live in constant fear of their personal safety. Marta Lempart, head of the Women's Strike, addressed an IPPF meeting in June, and she said, "I'm very frightened. I keep going, but I'm very frightened because I know eventually they're going to get to me." She has, as Neil says, more than 100 cases against her, but the most recent of which is prosecutors in Warsaw filed an indictment against her and 2 other leaders of the movement for organizing protests, peaceful protests, during the COVID-19 pandemic. These carry the possibility of an 8-year prison term. So we are talking about, in the EU, peaceful protesters could go to prison for 8 years. Is that acceptable in the European Union in 2022? I do not think so. A specific detail worth mentioning in the case of Marta is that one case is also filed against her by Ordo Juris, Neil mentioned. In this specific case, the judge appointed to hear the case was actually suddenly replaced by another judge appointed by the president in 2021. In the judge's previous role in the Ministry of Justice, she was actually at the head of the very department in charge of rolling out the controversial reforms to the Polish judiciary, which we've discussed, and which were condemned by the Court of the Justice of the European Union. The right to a fair trial is no longer guaranteed in Poland, and Marta is facing just such a trial. I think she has every right to be fearful. But in her words, because she always thinks of others before she thinks of herself, she says, "I am just one of many. We are talking about 6,000 people being harassed for protesting, who will be taken down one by one if the erosion of judicial independence is not stopped immediately." Across IPPF globally, we see how women's bodies are battlegrounds on which the struggle between authoritarianism and democracy is being fought. In Poland, the attack launched on women in 2016 was the warning signal for the attack on the rule of law and the right to protest that has followed. And we see the same patterns everywhere, including in the United States. IPPF, International Planned Parenthood Federation, is an organization that is supposed to be working on healthcare. That's what we work on, sexual and reproductive healthcare. But we find ourselves having to provide organizational security expertise and fund personal safety measures, including in EU countries. This is not our job. Why are we having to do this in the EU? It's crucial that the European Parliament continues to put pressure on the Polish government to comply with the rule of law and fundamental rights and allow full freedom of expression without fear of reprisal. The Polish government should take genuine steps to reform its politically compromised judiciary, which was instrumental in rolling back abortion rights and has a direct effect on people's lives and loss of life, as we've heard. Parliament must hold accountable the European Commission and EU member states to use all the tools you have at your disposal in this regard. And a particular note, the response to the Ukraine crisis cannot be used as a get-out-of-jail-free card for its abuses of the rule of law, while simultaneously attacking the very civil society organizations and human rights defenders, like FEDERA sitting beside me, who are actually providing the support to Ukrainian women and children. It's civil society who are responding to this crisis. So it's critical that the European Commission stands firm on its position that the Polish government must relinquish executive power over judges in order to receive the tens of billions of euros in grants and loans. The EU should also insist that Poland and all member states uphold the right to comprehensive sexual and reproductive health care as part of their fundamental rights obligations. Because without an independent judiciary to ward against potential police abuses, the right to peacefully protest, for the right to safe abortion access, and for many other things that we hold dear in the EU, is under dire threat. And if it is not protected, more women will suffer the consequences, and more women will die, and we'll be here in another 10 years, and we can't accept that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So we have heard 4 interventions, very strong interventions, showing us clearly that there is a serious issue, not only in Poland, as we see, but also in some other member states. And as Izabela said in her text messages, last text messages, women are being treated as incubators, and that should not be a case. And this freezing effect, which led to the death of the 6 women so far that we know, and the pregnancy register that you know was introduced in Poland to follow the pregnancy and to persecute those who are terminating their pregnancy. This shows us clearly the way some member states are going. And it reminded me when I was hearing to these stories, this dystopian series, Handmaid's Tale, where it all we've seen in the series, we never thought that this may happen. And here we are, 2022, member states of European Union, the heaven on earth, we could think, and here we are. So thank you very much for that. Before we go to Q&A session, the first one, I want to welcome the journalist, sorry, they're not here. Okay. They're on the way. Okay, so I'm not to welcome them yet. Okay. I was informed I am to welcome someone, but we wait. Okay, then we go to Q&A session. We will hear for the first round the members of the FAM committee and LIBE committee to present their position of the political groups. And the first one, we will have EPP from FAM committee, Elżbieta Łukacijewska, my colleague from the committee. Elżbieta, the floor is yours for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Dziękuję bardzo, panie przewodniczący.
Thank you very much, Chair. Today, I want to speak on behalf of thousands of Polish women from cities, towns and villages from different regions, including from my region, Podkarpacie. Those women are ignored by the government. Women are going through hell. This is an act of violence and disrespect towards women. This is also an act of blatant ignorance of medical knowledge. Women are falling victim to this policy. It's only a fetus which counts, and women are supposed to be heroes. All of them. The government is just thinking about a fetus. Viable or not, doesn't matter to the government. If a disabled child is born, the woman is left to her own devices. In 80% of cases, partners or husbands leave such women to their own devices without help, and the government is not helping either. Polish women want to give birth, but they do not want to die for it, and they do not want to sacrifice the happiness of their families. Polish women do not want to watch their babies die. This voice of Polish women is not being taken into account in the decision-making processes that concern the health and life of women. Doctors, discreetly, off the record, behind the scenes, say it themselves, that they are ashamed, that their hands are tied, they have no room for maneuver because they are under pressure and they might be liable. We are talking about criminal liability, penal liability here. But many gynecologists are so-called conscientious objectors. This is unacceptable. This is very telling that I can't see PIS colleagues here. My female colleagues from PIS do not have the courage to face this situation, to listen to the Polish women and to understand what they are going through because of what their government is doing. The PIS colleagues are afraid. Ireland has had a difficult situation, but the law has been changed. I have hope for Poland. I hope that after the next elections we will go in the same direction. We'll have a new government, a different government, and we will scrap this cruel, barbaric law that makes it impossible to remove fetuses with fatal abnormalities.
It's our colleague from LIBE, former Prime Minister of Poland, our colleague from Polish delegation, Ewa Kopacz. The floor is yours, Ewa.
Bardzo dziękuję.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And first of all, I would like to thank you, Chairman. Thank you for this hearing. Half of the Polish society is the topic of this hearing. Half of the Polish population, Polish women. There is 1.5 million more women than men in Poland, so we deserve this serious discussion on our rights. Dear ladies and gentlemen, when I heard about Izabela's tragedy, I have to say that as a politician, as a doctor, I was overwhelmed in the whole of Europe because of very difficult demographic situation. We want women to have more children, but what would you do if you were a young woman who knows that even though her baby is bound to die, she will have to carry the pregnancy to the very end at her own risk? So the question arises, how many people will decide to have children? When I was in Polish parliament, in Polish government, I was doing my utmost to have good family policy so that more and more children are born in comfortable circumstances. This was one of my most important priorities. When I see how ideologically biased politicians create hellish conditions for women, I have no words to describe this wickedness. Today we're discussing a concrete issue. This is a tragedy of a family. This is the tragedy that shouldn't have happened in a civilized world. But we're also discussing in the shade of the fate of Iranian women following midterm elections in the US, where the abortion issue influenced the results of the vote. But we have to remember that both American women, Iranian women, they faced up, they stood up. They don't want women to be treated as objects. They are fighting for their rights. And our obligation, politicians, is to defend women in the whole of EU, including Poland, my country. Women cannot be treated as a property of oppressive state. We should do our utmost so that Izabela's death, Izabela from Pszczyna, is not in vain. Never more. Women's life, but also their husbands, fathers, cannot be a part of ideological game between politicians. Enough with trading in our bodies, in our families, in our health. It is difficult for me to talk to you because on the one hand, I'm a politician. I'm a politician, but I'm also a woman. I'm a mother. I'm a grandmother. I'm a friend. I am a Polish woman. And the death of Izabela moved me deeply when I thought that this could happen to any of us, to any women we know. This is something that really overwhelmed me. I am overwhelmed when I see that the PiS government crossed the line. And behind this line, we only have anger, contempt, helplessness, wrath, and very often, as we see following this, the death of Izabela, also death. Izabela should become the patron of our movement to defend our health, our rights, the movement to defend our freedom, women's freedom. And this is unique and the right moment. This hearing, this day, this is the day to say stop, not one more. And I would like to thank you for that, Chairman.
And this is the moment we were waiting to welcome the journalists, young employees and journalists from the Dutch national broadcaster NOS. They are called NOS Young. Welcome. Where you are, show yourself. They're over there. Welcome. And I also want to, this hearing pays a lot of media attention. We have also a bunch of Polish journalists present in this room and online. So welcome all, and thank you very much for being with us today at this important hearing. So now we go to S&D group, and then we have two colleagues of mine who will be representing the both committees. The FAM committee is represented from the S&D group by Fred Matic, whom I told you was chairing the mission to Poland and has experience with this issue discussed today. Fred, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Robert, Pietro, and thank you to all the guests, to all the ladies who are here to us today, especially Madam Skrobol, to whom I wish to express my condolences because of the loss in her family. Poland is a disgrace in the European Union, and we must clearly say so. It became even clearer to me 10 days ago when I led a delegation of this committee to Poland. The meetings we held showed that the situation is even worse than expected. The best thing to show this is to see how we were received there. So there was a specific way that we were accepted by the members of the Sejm, and it opposed greatly to those to the manner of acceptance we received in the NGO offices. Also, we contacted the Ministry of the Family in the Polish government, and they said no to everything. They even claim that Poland is the best country in the world to live in, which I do not doubt, but also I told her that at the European Parliament we often adopt resolutions, and whether she believes it or not, every second resolution concerns Poland. She, of course, said this was not true, and I said that even though she is not from my political family, she is free to come as my guest to the European Parliament and perhaps to explain to all of us that things are not such as we believe they are. And let me just share a few of the most shocking things that we've heard. The pregnancy register that we discussed in our committee also claims that this is just a part of the procedure to upgrade their IT structure, which means that they actually had an attitude towards us as if we were mentally a bit ill or disabled. And they were bragging about the numbers and statistics. And of course, they neglected the procedures, the medical procedures that the Polish women had to perform in other countries. I also had to mention the LGBTI-free zones. They claimed that this was a joke on behalf of the local governments and activists. And I asked, is this possible? Is this possible to take place in Poland, a country that remember free zones? Is it possible in Poland and in Warsaw? But they negated the reality of homophobia and discrimination that takes place in their country. I cannot believe that in 2022 we have a member country in the EU that literally kills women and manipulates the facts while doing so. Anybody who believes it is out of touch with reality or does not care about the well-being and health of women. So 2 years have passed since this ban. At least 6 women have lost their lives, and still we hear about the national jurisdiction and rights of national countries. And who is there to protect the girls and the ladies and the women in that country? Only a few brave activists who are here with us today, and I want to thank them for it. Be sure that socialists and Democrats are with you, will not abandon you, and we will never give up on this fight. Thank you.
Fala Fred, and representing Libe from S&D Group, I have my Polish colleague from the same delegation, Łukasz Kochut. Łukasz, the floor is yours.
Przede wszystkim bardzo dziękuję za to wysłuchanie.
I would like to thank you for this hearing. In the period of 7 years, our government has crossed many red lines of humanity, of decency, and it has also crossed the lines endangering the health of women. Women need to be allowed to choose this little and that much. It needs to be accompanied by responsible sexual education. We also need to protect life, of course, but as a state, we also need to help the victims of domestic violence. I'm from Silesia, just like Madame Skrobol. I like working on solid, tangible things. Together with my colleague, I have been working on a report on the Istanbul Convention. Soon we are going to present this report. I wanted to call on the institutions to ensure financial support for organizations that fight domestic violence and violence against women. I would like to ask a question to Madame Skrobol. Did you get any assistance as a family from the Polish government? What would you say? Did you receive any help, any care from the Polish government following the strategy? Thank you for being here. Let us make sure that Iza will have not died in vain. Not one more. My promise is that this will not be an empty slogan. It will be followed by legislative changes that need to take place in Poland. Just to wrap up, about Kaczynski. Towards Kaczynski. Polish women do not become mothers not because they are alcoholics, as Jarosław Kaczynski recently suggested, but because they are intimidated, they are scared. Kaczynski, you should go away from politics.
Przechodzimy teraz, we go now for the third political group in this house, Renew. And the first one on my list is my colleague from FAM Committee, who was a member of the mission to Poland, Karen Melchior. Karen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I want to thank Barbara for being here and also Izabel's family, because standing up and saying that you have lost family members, that you have had health problems because of the lack of health care for women in Poland is something that takes courage, both because of the attacks, the hate speech, but also the taboo that having abortions, having the need for abortions still is in Poland. So I really want to thank Mrs. Skrobol for being here and also Izabel's family. Your intervention made me incredibly sad to hear of the loss of your sister-in-law, of Izabel's loss of life and her family's loss. This is correctly a joint FAM-LIBE committee meeting hearing, because this is the result of a politicized tribunal, justice system, and public prosecution system. Because these examples of medical malpractice should be prosecuted so that doctors in Poland are more scared of not treating women properly and giving them the healthcare that they need than being criminalized for having given women abortions. We have had 6 women, at least that we know of, that have died due to pregnancy complications. These doctors and these hospitals should be sued for malpractice. Instead, we have doctors and health professionals that are scared of providing healthcare because they would be criminally liable for having provided abortions. This has got to stop. During our mission 10 days ago, as explained by Mr. Matic, it was a surreal experience. But we got guarantees from members of the PiS party saying that, of course, any doctor would choose to save a woman's life by providing an abortion when needed. Otherwise, it would be the case of malpractice. I think we should support the civil society in Poland by asking the Polish government to explain what they do in each of these known cases for making sure that the women had received the medical attention that they needed. We must be aware that this is not only a Polish issue. A lot of our Polish colleagues have been speaking out about this today. I'm deeply sad today, but I have been angry for 2 years for the situation of women in Poland, because this is not just Poland and Polish women. This is an issue for women all across Europe and all across the world. Even in Denmark, we see youth wings of our political parties, from the Conservatives, from the EPP group, and also from right-wing extremists that are putting in question the women's rights to abortion. In Hungary, the Ministry of Interior decided a few weeks ago that women should now listen to the heartbeat of the fetus. In Slovakia, ultra-conservatives are again proposing a dangerous law, which has been rejected by Parliament last year after huge protests around the country. The position of our Parliament is clear. The full and universal access to social and reproductive health rights for all, without discrimination, has to be guaranteed in Poland, as well as in other EU countries. Thank you so much, and we will continue to support your work.
Thank you very much, colleague. And the next one from the same group is Maria Soraya Rodriguez Ramos. Soraya, the floor is yours.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, Chair. Let me start by thanking everyone who is here, particularly Barbara, who's related to Izabel. Here we've been hearing about what happened to Izabela, Marta, Anya, Justina. And I think we're all feeling powerless. And I also feel shame. The situation in Poland is completely unacceptable. It's unthinkable. The EU represents freedom and justice. It's founded on the rule of law. How can the EU allow a European government on European soil to legislate against women with criminal laws? And this legislation has taken their lives away. What we have to ask ourselves is, what else can we do? Are we doing enough? The immediate answer to that is no. We're not doing enough. We're allowing this government to act with impunity. It continues to legislate using the most odious practices of dictatorships, pregnancy lists, instilling fear in doctors, threatening them with severe penalties. And many of these doctors can't even look at themselves in the face when they allow a woman to die, to put her life at risk. Women's rights, sexual and reproductive rights, the right to safe termination, all of these are fundamental rights. There should be no space in Poland, Hungary, or in any other country for a government to legislate against these fundamental rights. My political group and the whole European Parliament wants the European Charter of Human Rights to include access to termination as a fundamental value. The Commission should look at the RRF funds. And the Commission has been looking at these RRF funds. But last month, Poland received over 350 million euros. So this government feels safe, but there's uncertainty for women, and women's health and women's lives in Poland are at risk. The worst is that the judicial system in Poland is also instrumentalized against half of the population. So that means that there's even greater impunity that the Polish government enjoys. We therefore need to spur ourselves into action. We have to ask the Commission for much more to be done, because we can do this. And on behalf of these 6 victims that we've heard about, but I'm sure there are many more, there's silence, there's terror, there's denunciation. All of that means the cases are being hushed up. So on behalf of these victims, their families, let's not forget the pain of their broken lives. On behalf of them, this Parliament and the Commission needs to do more for Poland and for the whole project.
Gracias, Soraya. And then we go to the Greens. And from the Greens, I have only one speaker on the list. It's Sylwia Spurek from the FAM Committee, Vice Chair of our committee. Sylwia, the floor is yours. Proszę bardzo.
Bardzo dziękuję.
Thank you very much. Let me start by saying that for more than 20 years I was working on the rights of women. And we should remember that it wasn't in 2020 that the access to abortion was restricted severely. Many people forget this, but we should look at the entire story to draw the right conclusions. It all started in 1992. Doctors restricted access to abortion in the new Code of Ethics. Then, a year later, an anti-abortion law was passed in the parliament. Only 3 dramatic exceptions were allowed. We are talking about 1993 here. But even in those exceptional cases, it was in practice extremely difficult to obtain access to abortion. That has prepared the foundations for what happened recently. The Constitutional Court ruled against women, but it wasn't for the first time. In 1997, the Polish Constitutional Court said that it was unconstitutional to remove pregnancies for social reasons. Then there was another judgment concerning conscientious objectors. The fact that doctors can invoke conscientious objection and refuse to terminate pregnancy. So one thing is the law, one thing is the discourse. The politicians no longer talk about fetuses, they talk about children, saying that abortion is always bad. And even liberal politicians say that abortion is always bad and best case can be the lesser evil. I can quote the abortion dream team. They say abortion is okay, abortion is fine. Any woman who thinks about terminating her pregnancy must be reassured like this. The government is failing, so the NGOs have taken over, such as FEDERA, the Network of Women, Abortion Dream Team. So the state has failed on its obligations. I'm saying obligation because access to reproductive health and abortion is something that the state has an obligation to provide. Justyna Wydrzyńska has been mentioned several times here. There is a case against her. She has been accused of facilitating abortion, and it's possible that she will go to prison for this. Before the recent changes, the law was very restrictive. Now, the few exceptions that had been left are being taken away. What is Brussels saying? Brussels is saying, well, it's not within our remit. It's easy for the Commissioner, Madame Dalli, to say this. It's probably easier than looking for a solution. What I'm saying is that every woman should be allowed to decide what happens to her body. If that requires a change to the treaties, let us talk about the treaty changes. Why not? Now I would like to ask a question to the speakers. Kamila, Ferenc has already mentioned these issues, and in the same vein, I have the following questions. What are your expectations from the EU institutions? Would you like to see the treaty being changed?
Franco, and now we go to ECR, and I have Margarita de la Pisa-Carrion. And I know, Margarita, that you signed for the second round, so maybe I give you the floor, more time now, so you can join your speech. Otherwise, you can take the floor again later. Up to you. I will follow your time.
Okay. We will see how long it takes and see if it's one round or two. Muchas gracias, colega.
Thank you, colleagues. Again, this institution is using the FEM committee to give an anti-democratic view and a biased view of what the social reality is, with debates that follow a single line without giving a contrasting or differing view. In this case, this is oriented towards this would be oriented towards defending life. Now, as previously stated, we went on a mission to Poland, and I was there as well. Under health circumstances, abortion is possible, and the patient can present any negligence to make sure that this has been addressed. Now, we understand in the terrible case of Izabela, there is still an ongoing procedure. Therefore, it would be a manipulation to bring this here as a case that is clear-cut against Poland. Now, looking at the case of Poland and abortion, I would return towards the regulation in the case of my country, where there's actually a support for abortion against pregnant women. In fact, when you're pregnant and you go to the doctor in Spain, they ask you if you would like to keep your baby. It is treated as an object on which you can have a decision with neglect of the human condition. And at times, there is even a second or third proposal to turn to abortion. And this is absolutely intolerable. If a child is born with a disability, what happens? There is a hostile environment that rejects the child as if the child should never have been born. This is not something that I'm imagining, and it's something that I've experienced myself. Now, it is, and sometimes individuals want to continue with their pregnancy and they don't even have the right to be assisted in their situation. And it is considered that the doctors have a scientific responsibility to assist women to be able to pursue in the pregnancy. How can women trust a doctor if they carry out abortion procedures? Now, people that think like me are accused of being against human rights. This has happened today. And when actually what we're trying to do is defend health and life. In 48, when we talk about the Charter for Fundamental Rights, did we believe at the time that abortion was a human right? Clearly not. Now, if we look at the greatness of life, what we're doing is just distilling it down to a materialistic end. If you want to keep the baby, fine. If you don't, throw it away. And therefore, we are shedding scorn on life. When it comes to the physical and psychological health of the woman, we're not taking care of that, or the fact that a family and love that is at the heart of that. The paternal role as well is not paid tribute to, and in fact the woman should have the support of the father. Women are left all alone and powerless. So what does this mean? It means that yes, we are afraid. It is a dark sea and a tormented one, and it's the situation that we can see in my country, and I'm afraid of it and feel very fearful, because what we should have is to make sure that we protect our life, the most important thing that we have. Poland is following a democratically elected line in terms of what their values are, and it is fully in line with their constitution as well. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, colega. I just want to mention that Margarita de la Pisa-Caron was also a member of the mission to Poland. I forgot to mention that. Thank you very much. And then last one of the speakers on my list from this first round is Sandra Pereira, representing the left in our House. Sandra, the floor is yours.
Obrigada, Presidente. Queria também agradecer.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank the panelists. Thank you for sharing your experiences and that information. We hear the retrograde views of the Conservatives and their views on women. All of that has a direct impact on them. It affects their access to termination and to other sexual and reproductive rights. The obstacles to these rights are backsliding, civilizational backsliding that we cannot accept. There was a question I have. Perhaps it was answered, perhaps not. I want to hear about the number of secret terminations in Poland. Do you have those numbers? We know that poorer or more vulnerable women are more likely to get an illegal abortion. On the other hand, a more wealthy woman might travel abroad outside of Poland to get a termination. We know that banning abortion doesn't actually reduce abortions. It makes it secret, unprotected, illegal, and that affects women's health, as you've spoken about in your testimonies with countless examples. In my native Portugal, we ended, we legalized abortion in 2007. Since 2007, there have actually been fewer abortions. Let me express my solidarity with all Polish women, the panelists, and we will continue to fight for the rights of all women. Thank you very much.
Obrigado, colleague. And Malin Bjork indicated to speak in favor of her group from Libe. So Malin, would you like to take the floor? Go on.
Thank you very much. And I must say that, as some of my colleagues have said here also, it makes us very saddened and also angry, of course. And all my condolences to Izabela and her family, to her family, and thank you for being here with us today. It is very important. This law is barbaric, it has been said before. It is also an emergency bell to all women in Poland and across Europe. It means that women are left to die. It means that we are not safe in a hospital where you're supposed to be safe. It means that you're not safe when you seek health care. I mean, it's the reverse world in terms of how it, in comparison to what it's supposed to be. And now when we hear about this pregnancy register, in addition to that, it feels like we are in the Handmaid's Tale. And our job here, as responsible and having political mandates, is to restore human rights, to restore women's rights, dignity and health. Our job is to ensure women's rights to decide freely over our bodies and to have the right to access safe and legal abortion care. And our job is also, as was mentioned by IPPF and EPF and by other speakers, is to restore the respect for democracy and rule of law. We cannot let Marta Lempart or Justina being persecuted in court systems in Poland. This is not democracy. It's not a functioning state of rule of law. We cannot let authoritarian leaders make women and LGBTI people a battleground, our bodies, our very bodies and lives into a battleground. So I think here today we have to ask ourselves, and I think the proposals from you, speakers, have been very clear to us. You want to see that we make reproductive coercion a kind of violence against women. We have a directive on the table on gender-based violence. Just let's put it in there. And I'm looking at my colleagues here in the European Parliament. Do make those amendments. Make sure that it makes it into this directive. And the other thing is, you know, we have to promise each other that we don't release funds to Poland until they can live up to the respect for rule of law and democracy and fundamental rights. This law was made on a faulty system of judiciary. And also, who will push the European Commission to make sure that when we look at health, we also look at sexual and reproductive health along the lines that the WHO have now published the guidelines on abortion care. We need to adopt the legislation on SLAPs, to stop these lawsuits against public interest activists. I think it's time for accountability and it's time for solidarity from all us in the political house here. And I wear this scarf. It's a green scarf that was worn in Argentina from the women fighting for abortion rights for many, many, many years. And they did succeed. And they left no one behind. And I would like to say to you, Polish activists and women that are fighting for abortion rights, that we will stand by you, with you. We will be determined, we will be in solidarity, and we will be there to leave nobody behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleague, for your last intervention in the first round of the political groups. And now we go into replies to questions, and I will give 3 minutes to each speaker when we start. Of course, if you're willing to speak, if not, you are not forced to do so. Barbara Skrobol, the sister-in-law of Izabela Skrobol, is the first one to speak. Barbara, możesz teraz odpowiedzieć, jeśli chcesz.
You can reply if you want, Barbara. The floor is yours.
Pan Kochut pytał mnie, czy...
Mr. Kohut asked me if my family received some help from government. From the ministry, we received an offer of psychological assistance. That was all, nothing else. That's my response. Thank you.
One is Kamila Ferenc, lawyer of FEDERA. Kamila.
Odpowiadając na pytanie, czego
what we expect, of course, the amendment of treaties, access to abortion should be considered a human right, but before it happens, there is a long process ahead of us. We need solutions now, financial solutions. Abortion should be free of charge for Polish women in the whole of the EU. We cannot have a situation where these costs must be borne by individual women, and some individual governments do that. They finance abortions. For example, Danish government, they finance abortions for Polish women. I think that health standards should be the same everywhere, and we should also have better financial support for organizations, for foundations. And we should also consider abortion and streamline abortion in the whole legislative process of the EU, because there is no health without access to safe abortion. And when it comes to this dissenting voice that we heard, I would like to say clearly our position of feminist organizations who fight for access to abortion. We fight for abortion, which should be the right. This is clear. We want both. We want support when we want to terminate pregnancy, but we also want support when we decide to carry pregnancy and a disabled child is born. But our government does not give us any of this. They do not ask us what we need when we give birth to a child. And when we scream, when we have protests, when carers of disabled children go to the Polish parliament to protest, then the Polish government turns a blind eye and provides no support. So we have two worlds. My world is the world which gives choice and which gives support to whatever a decision of a pregnant woman. However, in Poland, those who have children, when we also fight for in vitro rights to in vitro, or if people do not want to become parents, then in any case, the voice of interested parties, of stakeholders, is ignored, is undermined by the single political option, the single political party. This is not what the law should be all about. It is not about teaching from the rooftops. This is about enabling people and helping people with their choices. You also talked about abstract values, the father figure love. But where was love when Izabela was dying, suffering in a hospital in Poland? She left behind a daughter and a loving husband. Love is when you listen to women, when you listen to their needs, when you help with their needs. And love is not when you publicly talk about love for life, support for families, when you deprive people of this life at the same time. And as long as a woman is not considered to be more important than a fetus, and this is our position, as long as we do not look at everything from the point of view of a woman, then we won't have a safe and just society. We cannot really replace the interests of women with the interests of a fetus. When it comes to underground abortions, the number of such abortions, illegal abortions, we estimate that this is around 150,000 to 200,000 abortions really. And women have these abortions regardless the legal situation, but costs are high. Psychological, emotional costs are high. Women feel left alone, and 70,000 Polish women, since the decision of the criminal of the court, left Poland to have abortion.
The European Parliament Forum for Sexual.
Thank you for giving me the floor. Just very briefly to share some final thoughts. One of them would be on authoritarian legalism. Simply because a government legalizes through formal procedures stripping certain people of rights does not mean it is democratic. And I think we need to take a look at what happened in Poland and also compare this with what happened in the United States, where women were stripped of abortion rights through a process of authoritarian legalism, where a democratic process, for example, the 2016 bill to prohibit abortion in most cases in Poland was not successful through a formal democratic process. Therefore, the Constitutional Court was weakened and softened in order to produce the same thing. In the United States, it is the Republican Party which stacked the courts with biased judges which overruled Roe v. Wade. So we see the strategy of ultra-conservatives, anti-democratic, illiberal movements working to weaken democratic institutions in order to achieve the desired results of undermining human rights in certain areas. So I think, first of all, we need to have really a rule of law, democracy perspective on this and be absolutely unwavering in making sure that Poland and other member states adhere to the basic criteria of EU membership. Then finally, on the question that was raised about whether to include abortion into the treaties or the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights, I would say we need to do a bit more than just abortion, but all sexual and reproductive health and rights, because as I pointed out, it is not just the right to abortion that is compromised for Polish women, but equally their access to contraception. So they have no ability to choose the outcome of a pregnancy, whether it's desired or not, but they even have a compromised ability to choose if and when to get pregnant. They are deprived of many of their rights to control their own fertility. And that is a new battleground for many of the illiberal and anti-democratic forces that we see in Poland, but also in other member states of the European Union and beyond. So thank you.
And thank you for your time discipline. And the last one is Carolyn Hickson, who is the regional director of the International Planned Parenthood Federation and the European network of it. The floor is yours for 3 minutes.
Thank you. I think the main question relevant to me was what Europe can do, the EU can do. And I think, as Neil has said, the most important thing is to accept no derogation from the rule of law and the key values of the European Union, because it's not just about Europe. IPPF works in 130 countries in the world, and we see a battle, a global battle going on the one hand, between the values that the EU espouses of equality, democracy, justice, the rule of law, multilateralism, universalism, and those who would prefer authoritarianism, power, control. And women's bodies are at the heart of the battle. This is how they're used. So when you see an attack on abortion, or you see an attack on emergency contraception, or you see an attack on LGBTQI rights, you can know that coming shortly afterwards or at the same time is an attack on the basic rule of law. So we need to be able to go to international negotiations. We need to be able to support other countries, as we always have in Europe, by leading an agenda that cares for people, that protects people, that is dependent on the institutions that we have fought for in Europe. It's only a few days since the 11th of November. We fought and died for what we've built in Europe, and we need to defend it with every fibre of our being in our own continent, because if we can't do that, we cannot stand in judgment on other countries. And we cannot support the forces in those countries who are fighting for the same values that we've fought for generations. Democracies don't die anymore because men in tanks drive over people. They die because they take the very institutions that are meant to defend them and they turn them around and they corrupt them and they make them work against the values that they're supposed to stand for. So we are civil society. We don't have so much power. You are in positions of privilege where you can do something. So our request to you is that you stand for these values. You you do everything you can to hold Poland accountable, to hold Hungary accountable, to hold all the EU countries who would go away from those values, because it's the only way to make sure that we have the Europe that we want our children and our grandchildren to inherit, and a Europe in which we won't have panelists coming to talk about women who die when they should be in the care of doctors in the very place to protect them. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to begin by thanking the members of Parliament, my colleagues, for their input, their comments, and their speeches on this crucial debate. And I'd also like to thank the guests for their answers to all of the questions that were raised. Now, I'd like to give the floor to other members of the Parliament who have requested it. They will all have 1.5 minutes. I know that our colleague from the EPP, Pernille Weiss, has requested the floor. Therefore, I should like to give it to her now.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to speak my native language today, Danish, and express my deep respect, my very deep respect, empathy, and also express, of course, my womanly solidarity with you. And thank you for coming here today. So the debate, the attention, help, creativity, all of this makes a difference. And that is something that can be not always carried out in one afternoon in the European Parliament. And those of us have had many years' experience that we can't just solve things with a hearing, even in a meeting room, which is very far away from those who experience what we are talking about today, a way that confirms their opinion that we have to have resistance against understanding this. Many countries, ever since I was born, in fact, and I'm not that young, we've found a balance in this dilemma and the ethical challenges which are linked to the topic of abortion. So I'd like to ask you, we're almost at the end of the hearing. The next time we take an initiative, who else should be in the panel? What else could we do in order to have those people who aren't here today present, those people who aren't going to read about this hearing? How are we going to involve them? Because we can't be in a situation that 10 years from now, we're going to find out that in some countries, we haven't seen the desired changes. And I also hope, in fact, that we can be proud of the way we changed opinions, which exist in some environments, very, very sensitive topics. So we'd like to demonstrate to the rest of the world the way we address these issues, demonstrate that democracy is actually the least complicated way to develop a society and to encourage cooperation among countries. So who would you really like to hear at a hearing? Who would you like to involve in addition to what we've already done? Thank you.
Grazie. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Weiss. Now, on behalf of the S&D Group, I'd like to give the floor to Evelyn Regner for the FEM Committee.
Thank you very much, Barbara, for being here. Thank you for your courage. Thank you, Ms. Ferenc, Mr. Dutta, Ms. Higgins. I thank you for the excellent, determined work you're doing. We've heard from so many, and you've seen that there's an overwhelming majority who feels sad, angry, and there's so much latent energy in the room, so much determination. This de facto, there's so much determination to deal with this de facto abortion ban. We won't accept it. We are determined to ensure that this ban ends. The right to termination is a human right. It is a state and government failure in Poland. This has been a failure to Izabel and to others. The fact that these women have been allowed to die. It is our duty as the European Parliament and as European institutions to fight to ensure that the Polish government can't break the UN Convention on the ban of torture. But that is actually what they're doing. They're torturing women by forcing them to continue with these pregnancies. This isn't an issue that is in any way related to subsidiarity. If dealing with this de facto ban wouldn't be violating subsidiarity. No, on the contrary, it is up to us to do everything that we can to protect women. We've heard firsthand about what's happened, but there's so much latent energy in this room. The interpreters feel it too. Everyone has been affected by this. Men too. They are brothers, they are husbands, they are fathers, they are affected. Any woman could be affected by this. So it's our duty and our obligation to do more. And what you've said has further strengthened us in our fight. There won't just be another hearing, there will be another set of instruments. And I want to thank you for your concrete proposals, particularly on the issue of slaps and how we deal with them. There's also the issue of funding, because that's also quite gruesome. And then there's EU policy related to health, equality, and so on. Under those policy areas, it's so important to protect women and to include termination rights under those areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Evelyn. Now, on behalf of the S&D group, Ms. Moretti has asked for the floor. Thank you very much, Chair. I too would like to thank Barbara and all of the women that are here and that fight in Poland to make sure that this right is recognized. I'd like to turn to Margarita de la Pisa. This committee is so democratic that she can take the floor. We all have the right to take the floor and to give our views. But I did want to say, Ms. de la Pisa, I have 2 children. No one ever pressured me to have an abortion, but I do know many women who wanted to continue with their pregnancy but weren't able to, felt a lot of pressure by pro-life groups in Italy, or they did not receive the day after pill, or they had conscientious objectors who stated that they would not assist in that termination to pregnancy. And yet in Italy, the right to abortion is recognized as a law. So remember and just think for a second about those countries where it is not recognized as a right. So just so we can clarify a few things here. I do believe now that there should not be a single man, a single government, a single state, a single institution that would have a right to tell a woman who has been raped, victim of rape, that she has to keep that baby. Because our colleague, Ms. de la Pisa, needs to explain to me, if a man has raped a woman, does he love her? Is that love? I think we have to have clarification of this point as well. Now, as we've all understood, recognizing abortion as a human right, that would be very challenging because we would have to amend the treaties, and to amend treaties it takes decades. I think, therefore, we should work from another angle to make sure that abortion is recognized as a right to health, linked to health. And since health is an essential right of a human being, and for this reason, and because we should be able to practice and enjoy the right to health, that would mean that Europe can and must act. This, to me, would be the best way to make abortion a a right for all, inalienable. And I would conclude by saying that Europe cannot accept a state of things in which there are countries that are accomplice to murder, because if a woman is faced with the choice of making abortion or otherwise putting her own life at risk, or in the case of rape, like those women who have died, that means that a government is an accomplice to death. This needs to be stated, and this needs to be stated loudly and clearly, because women absolutely need to be able to have the right to self-determination and be free to do with their bodies as they choose. Thank you. Thank you, Alessandra. I'd like to give the floor now to Karen Melchior for the Renew Group.
Thank you that I can have the floor once again. I will also be speaking Danish. It's been very inspiring to listen to you today, and I will continue to have contact with you and see how we can support you against the attacks which are coming from the government and religious groups in Poland. Now, we've been talking today about balance and balance in the ethical choices being made. Here we have an example that the balance has been shifted by politicians who are interfering in healthcare. We have to ensure that doctors have the possibility of making the best possible medical decision in order to help their patients. As a society, we have to listen to what the women want, listen to what women need, and regardless of what the woman chooses. And we have to have, as a society and as politicians, have to not be interfering with healthcare and give the best possible healthcare to women. That is the balance. Balance is having politicians stop interfering with healthcare. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to give the floor now to Ms. Lukashinska.
Bardzo dziękuję za umożliwienie mi.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to take the floor again very briefly. I would like to thank all the colleagues present here. There are some colleagues on whom you can always rely. Today and during the plenary session, they expressed their solidarity with Polish women, their empathy. That matters. That matters a lot to Polish women. I would also like to give my condolences to the family of Barbara and to the family of all the victims of this barbaric law. I do hope that the law will be changed swiftly, and I hope that such tragedies will not happen again, because no one, no woman, no family, no children should suffer like this. Thank you.
Ridiamo la parola.
I'd like to give the floor now to Ms. de la Pisa Carrion for the ECR Group. The floor is yours.
Muchas gracias por alusiones.
Thank you. Let me answer. People aren't. We're not. Well, I myself have been pressured to abort. Disabled children are not welcome. And their mothers are proposed an abortion. And we're hearing that you can't end your pregnancy. But why? What would happen to these women if they don't end their pregnancy? What solutions are offered to them? Today, the only solution put forward is termination, and that's not fair. In order to have women's self-determination, there is predetermination, a predetermined route. The predetermined route is abortion, which is tantamount to coercion. Coercion. In the name of freedom, freedom is ended. And in the case of rape, Poland does allow termination. So there are two clauses which state that a termination can take place if there has been a rape or if the woman's life is at risk. So do know that. Otherwise, abortion is being promoted.
Sì, diamo la parola adesso.
Now I'd like to give the floor to Maria Soraya Rodriguez for the Renew Group.
Gracias, presidente.
Thank you, Chair. I will be brief.
Perdón.
Apologies. Briefly, this is a hearing on the subject of abortion. And Ms. de la Pisa Carrion has underscored Spain. Spain is my country. I would like to state that in my country, in Spain, women are not made to accept an abortion. What is respected in Spain is a woman's right to decide, to be a mother with a specific time frame and with full respect for women. So considering that we are here in a committee, in a democratic parliament, and everyone has a right to their opinion freely, I do want to state that there is no law in Spain like has been characterized by our colleague. And a woman in Poland should have a right to live in a country in which the right to women, the right to decide to become a mother, and should have the assistance when they decide to become a mother, because it is a right, of course, for a mother to become the mother of a child with disabilities, much like in Poland.
Sì, grazie.
Thank you. I don't believe there are any further requests for the floor at this time. Therefore, I would like to give the floor to our guests if they would like to add anything. They have 3 minutes each.
Barbara, chcesz coś powiedzieć?
Barbara, would you like to say something?
Chciałabym powiedzieć.
I would like to say and tell you that Polish women are also European women. Therefore, I would like to ask for your support, EU, to support Polish women. Thank you.
Kamila, Ferenc, se vuole intervenire.
Kamila, if you'd like to take the floor.
Ja myślę, że powiedziane zostało.
I think that a lot has been said today, and we only have to recall one thing. The fact that something is in the law, in a document, does not mean that it works in practice. And this is what is happening in Poland. The right to abortion when life is threatened is a fiction, which is borne out by a lot of cases. Lethal cases, but these are also cases we deal with in my organization, in FEDERA, where had they not been known to us, maybe they would have ended differently. So there are a lot of cases like this, and this is a new normal in Poland. Women are not saved, women are not helped, because even though we have a law, we have legislation, the whole atmosphere around abortion, this ostracism, for the past 30 years, abortion has been treated as something bad, a moral evil, something that should not be taking place. Therefore, we forget so often that women's health and life, but also well-being, the free choice, this is all menaced right now. So I think it is not sufficient to say that we in the Polish law guarantees abortion when life is threatened, or when women were raped, because Ukrainian refugees cannot terminate pregnancy even though they were raped in Ukraine, because the practice and the implementation of the law makes them become victims for the second time. They must prove themselves that they had been victims of sexual violence. They do not know how to find their way in the Polish legal system, which means that they cannot terminate this pregnancy, which is followed by a great suffering and trauma. So abortion in Poland, despite all the declarations, is a fiction. That's why we are here today, and we would like to call upon the EU to consider this matter seriously and take decisive steps to change this situation. Thank you.
Now I'd like to give the floor to Neil Datta if he is still connected remotely for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'll be very short. I'd like to say that, first of all, I consider myself to be very pro-life, to the point where I deeply regret having heard the testimony of the unnecessary loss of 6 lives of Polish women. I also am very fearful about the loss of lives about the future potential loss of life of Polish women. And that's why I think if we are pro-life, we need to recognize that abortion is part of life, and we need to make sure that it's legally, safely available so that women can have the life and destiny that they would like with their families and their loved ones. And I think for that reason, we need to really consider how it is that we can guarantee the right to abortion, the right to life of women in the European Union in the future treaties. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Carolyn Hickson for the last speech. The floor is yours for 3 minutes.
I think all I want to do is to say thank you, because I've heard from the floor, from the parliamentarians, some of the strongest advocacy, the strongest support, and that keeps us going, it keeps the activists going. We need a movement, we need a European movement, we need a global movement, and we're all part of that. Whether we're a politician, whether we're a civil society employee, or whether we're a grassroots activist, it's only by being together on the same team and standing up together that we will ensure that women have reproductive freedom, that women are safe, and that women no longer die. So I just want to say thank you to all of you, and thank you to the organisers for inviting us.
Thank you. Really, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for your presentations this afternoon. You really gave us a better understanding of this really difficult situation, one that involves all of us. Thank you for the full participation and the questions that you have raised on this extremely important issue. As a European Parliament, we called for Article 7 to be triggered, but we should do much more. And that is something that we are committed to collectively, such that we can put an end to this shameful, this inhumane practice and a violation of women's rights, an inalienable right that many of our colleagues have referred to. So we must put an end to all of this. And let's hope that we don't have to have another meeting of this sort. Let us bring this to an end. We shouldn't have to speak about it ever again. I know it is hard. We have to do it for women, because these women deserve to have this specific attention paid to them. Thank you to everyone.
Grazie, Vicepresidente della
Thank you, Vice Chair, from the Libe Committee.
For participation at this joint hearing of Libe and FAM. Thank you very much for all the contribution, and I'm sure we all agree that that any girl, any woman, not only in Poland, not only in Europe, but all around the world, will never walk alone. We will be in solidarity, and we are in solidarity, and this should be the message from today. Thank you very much, and with this, I close the joint hearing of Libe and FAM, and I make 2 minutes break for reassemble of the FAM committee in this room. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon.